Thank you, Maureen. And I just want to take a minute to thank all of you for participating. When I first logged on, there were 2 participants already signed on, and I was like, yay, we're going to have an audience. That doubled to 4 immediately, and when we got to 50, I was ecstatic. We have, at this current time, we have over 80 individuals attending our webinar today, and I want to thank each and every one of you for your participation, and I want you to feel free to contact me if you have any direct questions afterwards. I know that source selection can be a puzzle, but I like working puzzles, and I hope that you will understand through our successful requirements development that source selection starts way before we issue a solicitation. So that's what we're going to get started with. Now, as you were signing in, I was trying to keep track with how many of you had formal source selection experience. And I think we were about maybe 2/3 to 1/3 that had some. But we're going to take a minute and step back a little bit. And we're not going to jump into source selection as contracting officers and contract specialists currently know it. We're going to step into how do we define our requirement so that we can efficiently and effectively conduct a source selection. So with that, we'll move to the next chart, if I can figure out how to do that. I see it at the bottom. Okay. So, a well-written requirements document offers us a lot of benefits. The way I normally will put this when I'm in a classroom is nobody's perfect. Of course, I'm the exception, but nobody's perfect, to include me. If we're not perfect, we are not going to have a perfect requirements document. We are not going to have a perfect solicitation. We are not going to have perfect proposals, and we are not going to have perfect contracts. So there's always ways that we can make things better and improve our package requirements. So in a pre-award environment, what a well-written requirements document will lead to are fewer questions from industry when we put a draft RFP on the street, or even when we put our formal RFP. Because the more questions that are asked, that is a direct correlation to how well we have defined our requirement to begin with. So if we take the right people and the right time to develop the requirement as good as we can possibly get it, then we're going to have reduced questions. We're going to, in turn, be able to issue that RFP a lot sooner, and we should benefit by getting better proposals that will answer the mail. And by answer the mail, they will address what we have outlined as evaluation criteria in Section M of the RFP. If all of that happens, our number one goal is a happy, satisfied customer. And so the more we can do on the left, the more we can do up front, the better satisfied our customer will be. Now take that to the other end of the best value source selection process, where we have already made our decision, awarded our contract, and now we are in the performance management piece of our contract or our acquisition cycle. Hopefully, if we did our due diligence and we did a good job of developing the requirement, then we will have less material changes that will have to be negotiated in. That the fewer the changes, the less we stray from our contract award price, and we reduce the potential for an unsuccessful offeror to challenge a modification we've made after the fact that was an unfair change and in effect kept them from being able to propose. So let's get into a good description of what is a good requirements document. So we need to define the service or the product that the contractor will perform. So generally, you're either buying a service or you're buying a product. The source selection, formal source selection, can be used for both services and hardware. It is a little harder to explain and define what is our requirement when we're talking services than if we were buying an item that had thresholds and objectives that were clearly defined. We still need to take the time to try to solidify as many of the service requirements as we can so that when we issue the RFP, all of the potential offerors will be able to have the same information and be available to respond by submitting a valid proposal. So there are several ways that we actually start defining our requirements. And the first thing I want to do, and I know I can't hear you, but I trust each and every one of you to do this, but I want you to repeat after me. I will not cut and paste without reading it first. So let me clarify. There is nothing wrong with cut and paste from a previous contract, previous requirement, but read it and make sure that through your SWOT analysis, and that's an analysis of our stakeholders of what are the strengths with the current contract, what has been working well, what are the weaknesses, what are the areas that we can make an improvement or a change in the requirements this time that is going to help us avoid some of those post-award problems, and that's called a SWOT analysis. So you have to start with a baseline or you don't know how far you've come. So it is okay for you to start with existing documents as a baseline, but read them before you just take them, copy, paste, and submit, okay? That's probably one of the most important things that I can give you in this little webinar today. It's okay to cut and paste, but read it and make sure it still applies. So step 2, we're going to define the right type of work statement. So there are basically 3 different ways of describing your requirement. The first one we're going to talk about is a statement of objectives, or a SOO. So a SOO is a formal document used in solicitations when the government intends to provide maximum flexibility to each offer to propose an innovative approach. So to use a phrase that, and I don't have anything against cats, so don't write me ugly email, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. So this method allows each offeror the ability to be able to tell you their best proposed method to perform that service. So it is maximum flexibility looking for innovation. So the second one is a statement of work, or we call that a SAL. Now the statement of work is very defined. Not only does it tell them what I'm buying, whether it's a service or an item, but it tells them exactly how I want them to perform in order to give me what I need. So between a SOO and a SAL, you can see that the burden of risk is more on the government if we dictate the SAL. We dictate the what and the how. We take less risk if we do the SOO. We tell you what we need, but it's up to you, Mr. Offeror, to tell us what's the best way to meet our needs, okay? Then we have the third method, which is the performance work statement. And a performance work statement is closer to a SAL, but has a little bit of the SOO capability in with it. In a performance work statement, we are going to define the end result. Where a SOO might say, we are going to paint a room. The PWS would say, we are going to paint a 2,000 square foot room royal blue. The SAL would say, we are going to paint a 2,000 square foot room royal blue, ship number BL62. We are going to use a 1/4 nap roller. We are going to roll 2 coats vertically, one coat horizontally, and then another coat diagonally until we have covered all of the surface area. So with a PWS, we tell you the end result is a room painted blue. With a Sioux, it is a room painted blue, but it's not as clearly defined. It's open to interpretation. So we might have said different color blues, whereas with PWS, we said the royal blue. Whereas with South, we tell you exactly how to do it, how many coats, what nap on your roller, which way to roll the paint on. So it's very, very, very detailed. So what are the differences? And this is a little exercise we're going to work through. So if each of you have a pen and paper in front of you, I want you to pretend that you're the contractor and you are going to give me your innovative response to this question. The contractor shall provide a sweet treat which must include chocolate at all dining facilities on Valentine's Day. Take just a few seconds and write down what chocolate dessert are you going to provide in the dining facility. So I have now 101 participants, and I would venture to say that I'm going to have 60 to 70 different answers in response to that. It can go anywhere from a chocolate kiss. It can be an Oreo cookie. It can be chocolate mousse cake. It can be chocolate Godiva cake. It can be chocolate-covered strawberries. But there are many different ways for an offeror to meet that generalized Sioux. So without seeing the heads nod up and down that you're getting it, I'm assuming that we're okay with that part. We're going to move into a description now of the South. So I take that general requirement, and I'm going to go one step deeper, and I'm going to say, okay, it's not just any dessert that contains chocolate. I want chocolate chip cookies. So I have defined exactly what I want. But in a South, I'm exactly how I want it. So I'm giving you the recipe. I'm giving you the way that you are going to preheat the oven. I'm giving you the way you are going to use the mixer to mix the soft ingredients first and then add in the dry ingredients after that. I'm going to tell you the size of the cookie dough ball that you're supposed to put on the pan. I mean, you see how I have taken all of the guesswork on the offerer's part out of this requirement. Not only am I telling you what I want, I'm telling you how to make it or how to build it, or if it was a service, how to provide it, okay? So now let's go one step further and look at it in the form of a performance work statement. So with the performance work statement, I still have the defined end result in that I have 1 dozen chocolate chip cookies. But in order for me to be able to define what the offerors need to give me in a proposal, I need to ask and answer 3 key questions. So the first is, what is needed? So our answer to that one is 1 dozen perfectly baked chocolate chip cookies. When is it needed is the second question, and our answer is 1 week from today. And then what are the expectations of the item or service? And our answer is it must taste good and not be broken. So with that PWS, we've identified what our requirement is, but it's still not clear, not as clear as it can be. So the PWS reads, the contractor shall deliver 1 week from today 1 dozen perfectly baked chocolate chip cookies that taste good and are not broken. So taking a closer look, do you see any potential problems? So if we look at 1 week from today, is today the day I issue the RFP? Is today the day the offeror reads it? Is today the day that they looked at it and actually Valentine's Day was 2 months ago? So do I need those cookies after Valentine's Day? So you have to be a little bit more specific. 1 week from today needs to be objectified. When is that direct delivery date requirement? And then you've got perfectly baked chocolate chip cookies. What is a perfectly baked chocolate chip cookie? How many of you like a chewy chocolate chip cookie versus a crunchy chocolate chip cookie? Either one is right and either one can be perfect, but it is in the eye of the beholder. So if an offeror is trying to give me, the government, a perfectly baked cookie, they need to know what I consider to be perfectly baked. And then the next one is taste good and are not broken. So are not broken is a given, right? But taste is relative. Some may like a sweeter cookie. Some may like a less sweet cookie. Some may like the mini chocolate chip morsels, and some may like the dark chocolate chip morsels, while others like white chocolate chip, and some like milk chocolate chip. So there are different ways that can be interpreted. So as we are defining a requirement, especially for a competitive source selection effort, we need to be able to state it so that each offeror will interpret it the same way, okay? So in order for us to do that, we need to go into establishing our evaluation criteria. So this is stated in Section M of your RFP, and that's basing it on the uniform contract format, of course. Section M are the evaluation factors for award. How do we determine what is the best evaluation criteria for us to determine what is that perfectly baked cookie in this area? And it can be identified and broken down into factors or into sub-factors even. But factors and sub-factors have to set forth their relative order of importance. And within DOD, that relative order of importance cannot be percentage. So it cannot be that the taste of the cookie is worth 60% and the look of the cookie is worth 40%. It has to be in relative order of importance. And we use adjectival terms for that. So it would be that on the next chart, and then I'm going to back up and talk Section L, but on the next chart is Section M for our chocolate chip cookies. We state this is a competitive acquisition for the single award of a firm fixed price contract. We are going to consider 3 evaluation factors: technical, price, and past performance. The technical factor is significantly more important than the price factor, so we care more about how well it tastes than how much we have to pay per cookie. And then also the price factor is more important than the past performance factor. And all non-price factors combined are significantly more important than price. We are required to get to that level of relative order of importance by the FAR. That's in FAR 15. So we have identified our 3 factors: technical, price, and past performance. Now let's back up the chart and talk about what is in Section L. Section L is the instructions to offerors. So in order for you to have a valid solicitation for a competitive source selection, not only do you have to tell them what I am going to evaluate, but you have to tell them and instruct them on what to build in their proposal so that I can perform that evaluation. So it tells you exactly how to submit your proposal. We go into great detail to tell them it either has to be printed front and back or front only. What size font will we accept? What type font will we accept? And then we give them specifics about address each factor, maybe in a separate binder or in a separate chapter of their proposal. So we give them great detail. But what's very important when you're talking about source selection is telling the offeror, instructing the offeror what you need to see in their proposal so that you can do the evaluation that you told them you were going to do in Section M. So Section M and L always go hand in hand. And even though Section L comes before Section M alphabetically and in the uniform contract format, you have to develop Section M, what you are going to evaluate, before you can identify what do you need to see from the offers to conduct that evaluation. So M is written before L. Now let's go into our source selection on our chocolate chip cookie, and how did we instruct the offerors for Section. So back to our Section M, we had the technical factor, we had the price factor, and we had the past performance factor. Within the technical factor, we have two sub-factors. One is taste, and the other is appearance. And we tell them the appearance factor is evaluated for uniformity and overall visual appeal. What we're saying is basically don't send us a burned cookie, right? Although somebody might like a burned cookie, and that may be perfect. But typically what we're saying is what's important to us is taste and appearance. Then just like we stated within the factors, we have to state the relative order of importance in the sub-factors. So you have sub-factor 1 is more important than sub-factor 2. So we told them we're going to evaluate technical. Within technical, we're going to evaluate taste, and we're going to evaluate appearance. Now, what do I need to see in their proposal so that I can conduct that evaluation? So for the technical factor, what I need to see for the taste sub-factor is basically your recipe. I want the list of ingredients and the amounts of ingredients that you use. And then for sub-factor 2, which is the appearance, the author has to provide 6 cookies to be used for the evaluation. And that will be used for the evaluation of both taste and appearance. So what we're looking for, basically, first article testing, right? So we're going to have them provide us a bid sample so that we can conduct our taste and our appearance evaluation. And then for the price factor, it's firm fixed price. Remember, we told them that at the beginning of Section M. So we want to know how much are you charging me per cookie, and then the unit times the quantity equals the total price, and that's the total evaluated price, okay? And then with our past performance factor, this would be pretty fun, actually, to do past performance on chocolate chip cookies, but you're asking the offeror to identify who else have you sold these cookies to, and how many did you sell them? Now, if that's recent, then for us, recency is typically 3 years from the day we issue a solicitation. So within the past 3 years, identify who you have provided this chocolate chip cookie to, and then tell me the name of your contracting officer and the name of your technical point of contact. And then we want to talk to them and find out, were they pleased with the product that you provided, with the cookie that you provided? Did they have a lot of breakage issues? Or was it truly a perfectly baked cookie delivered on time and within budget for firm fixed price? You get what you pay for. And then also, or you pay for what you get. We only pay one price. And then also, we want to make sure that they did not have any problems delivering, okay? So those are 3 factors. Oops, sorry, I buzzed too far. So before we go into a conclusion and I wrap up what we basically just spent 25 minutes or so going through, do I have any specific questions from anyone out there? I know I've taken a relatively complex topic, and I've tried to put it in a simplified way that we can all understand it. But the key thing to remember is be specific, especially when you're dealing with services. Be as specific as you can so that all offerors are responding to the same level playing field. Maureen, do you have any questions yet?
I wanted to know, do you recommend one way of defining requirements over the other ways?
So that's a good question, and the DFARS, the Defense Supplement to the FAR, that actually states that the performance work statement is the preferred And in fact, you have to go and get approval or get a waiver to use something other than performance-based when you are dealing with services. When you're buying an item, you may very well have a mil spec that you have to adhere to. And in that case, performance work statement may not be conducive to that, but you could use a hybrid. You could use the mil spec for the direct pieces and performance-based for maybe associated services. But if it's approved service, it's more performance work statement.
Okay. Why should the contracting officer and the contract specialist be involved in defining the requirement? Isn't it the requirement's owner who is responsible?
So that's another good question. And again, I'm glad that I had quite a few contract specialists and contracting officers in the audience, because the typical, and from typical I'm saying this is what I saw 30 years ago when I started in contracting. It was us versus them. And us was contracting, and them was the requirements owner. And them did what they do over behind a magical fence. They developed their requirement, and then they threw it over the fence to contracting and said, now buy it yesterday. And those days are long gone. We are now all members of the acquisition team. And contract specialists and contracting officers are essential members of any acquisition team. You need to make the effort to be familiar with the requirement as they are developing the requirement. Even sometimes it is nothing more than just being a fly on the wall when your requirements office is discussing one of their technical issues. As contracting officers, contract specialists, we may not understand the technical aspects of it, but the more you listen, the more you absorb, and the easier it is to do your job and help choose the right type of contract, and help make sure that we have a really well-prepared solicitation before we post it to the public. So the reason why it's important is the contracting officer and contract specialist, both key members of the acquisition team, and should be involved in the requirements development as far left as you can. So definitely, as they're starting to plan, we contracting individuals should be included in those discussions.
Okay. Well, what about those people who are not in DOD? Where does the, how are they supposed to essentially, you've got lots of references that are from DFARS. How does that apply to them?
To DFARS or the ones who are outside of Department of Defense?
Well, right. So you've referenced DFARS on a number of occasions, but these people are not necessarily in DOD. How should they take your information? Okay, so I would think even if you're not within the Department of Defense, you all still operate under the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations. Is that a true assumption, Shane? Yes.
Okay, so we all operate under the FAR, and FAR Part 15, and specifically 15.3, details the source selection procedures. So everything that we have talked about as far as the source selection and developing Section M and developing Section L and those kind of things, that's all in the FAR as well. So it's not just for Department of Defense. That's just my background. That's where I come from. But we, whether you're a federal agency, a non-DOD agency, or a DOD agency, you actually establish the work product in the same manner. You still are part of an acquisition team. It may be called something different. It may be called an IPT. It may be called a working IPT, a WIPIT. But it's basically everybody that has skin in the game. Who are the stakeholders? And the stakeholders should get together early on to formulate what is the best approach, and have we presented a well-defined requirement.
Okay. Here's a question that I'm going to try to do verbatim because I don't know all the acronyms. It says PBSA can't be used for IFB/bid solicitations. Is that correct?
So read it one more time. I'm writing down those. Performance-based service contracting. I got that one.
Okay. Can't be used for IFB/bid solicitations.
Right.
Is that correct?
That basically is correct, because with an IFB, and I have very limited knowledge to IFB, and what knowledge I have of that and experience of that goes back 28 years ago when I was working in base operations. And for instance, my first solicitation, my first purchase order was for software. And to show my age, we were buying Corel Draw version whatever, 3.1 software. And so we had basically an IFB. We put out the requirement by part number, by NSN, very specific. That is objective. There is no subjectivity to that at all. It's very objective. You either get it or you don't. You meet it or you don't. And in my particular instance, I got in my IFB, my bids. I opened the bids publicly, and we awarded to the one contract who was responsible and had the lowest price. I ended up having to C for D. And yes, my very first action, I terminated for default because they could not provide the version at that price. They could have provided me an older version at that price, but they did not meet the need. So when you have true IFBs or bids, I would say that is true. That does not lend itself to performance-based. It lends itself to a specific part number purchase. Because when you start talking about performance-based, you start opening up subjectivity, and the IFBs are definitely more objective.
Okay. If anybody that posed questions has more information for the question, please go ahead and type those in to make sure that we got the answer completed and met your needs. Because there was an add-on to this question. I do believe that you've already addressed it, and she asks, or she just says that PBSA with the PWS requirements. So yes, you're still talking about performance-based.
Right, and performance-based is subjective, and so the amount of subjectivity leads you away from an IFB. Now let's go one step further into, let's talk about course selection a little bit more, and I hope I can shed a little bit more light on that question. You know, in the best value continuum, we have low price, technically acceptable offers. That's one way that we can do a best value. In order for us to do that, though, it still needs to be objective, just like we were talking about for the IFB. So you not only identify what technically acceptable is, but you have to tell offerors in your RFP what acceptable looks like. What is the standard of proof that that contractor has to provide in his proposal to prove he earns the acceptable check mark? So that's the closest thing under best value that we have to IFBs. But again, it is for very straightforward, very non-complex services. Let me give you for instance, of a service where you could use LPTA. Let's say roofing a building. Okay, I can give you the square foot coverage, or square yard, or however they measure it. I can give you the pitch of the roof. I can tell you that I require 35-year architectural shingles in any shade of onyx, of gray, anywhere from onyx to light steel gray, whatever, but as long as it's gray, I'm good. And I can actually say that that's technically acceptable, that a proposal is technically acceptable, even though I didn't tell them which brand of shingles to use. And I did not tell them what level of labor category they had to use. So, but what I would tell them is, in order for you to submit a technically acceptable proposal, you have to give me a plan that details what shingles you're going to use by part number so that I can verify it meets my need. What labor are you going to use, because we want to make sure that they are in accordance with wage determination. So you want to make sure they're paying the minimums right and those kind of things. And safety. Safety would be key in that. So we want you to address how you're going to, what are your safety harnesses that you're going to use or whatever in order to do that. So we would tell them this is what technical acceptable looks like, and then they either meet it or they don't. So close to ISD, but still a little bit more of subjectivity, a little more.
Okay. Are there any other questions out there? This has been a very quiet crew. But I think perhaps you were very descriptive. I myself now have a craving for chocolate chip cookies. So I do think I have one more here. Hang on for a second.
Okay.
Yes. Can we do firm fixed price with all three requirements? And I didn't get the rest of her question. Let's see if I can.
Well, let me go ahead and be working on that part while you're doing that. That's a good question, and I will give you the DAU answer. It depends. So it does depend on if we can identify to such a degree that we can ask a contractor to give us a firm fixed price, whether that's for a performance-based service or whether that is for a statement of work. If you can give them enough information and can expect them to be able to determine or estimate what their cost would be over the period of performance, then by all means use firm fixed price. Because the decision of whether to use firm fixed price or cost type contracts is the level of maturity of the requirement. If I can definitely say this is what I need, I have a better chance of going firm fixed price. If I have unknowns and I have to wait and see, and something, I'm not exactly sure how much labor it's going to take, I'm not exactly sure how much materials, and I can't expect a contractor to be able to tell me over a 5-year period that their cost will not increase at all, then that leads itself to the cost type contract. So yeah, you can use firm fixed price for all three as long as you have a well-defined requirement.
Okay. I think what's happening is that I'm only seeing parts of the question, and I haven't figured out how to see the whole question, but I have a question from Joseph. He asks, should you include estimated total hours for a labor hour requirement? But the problem is I can't see the rest of the question. So he's asking, I think, if you have to actually estimate the number of hours in the PWS.
Okay, so let me clarify what I think I understood the whole question to be. And Joseph, if we don't have it, write something else in and let us know. But the thing is, how specific do you get when you are giving all of the offers information to make sure they're all on the level playing field? You do not have to identify labor categories, and you definitely do not have to identify the number of hours, because what you just did is you took out all of the subjectivity that we were going to be looking for their innovations in performing that work. So the best way that I have found is if you have a service contract, and my computer just went dead, so y'all hold on while I log back in. But the best thing I have found for a service contract is have one of your evaluation criteria to be a sample task or a sample scenario. And what you would do is, as the government requirement, we would say, and let's just say this is for an IT work in a help desk or whatever. And so we say your sample task is you've been notified by Redstone Arsenal that their internet is down and has been down for the past 24 hours. What steps would you take to get them back up and respond within the time frame that is required by the PWS? So then you've given them the parameters, but how they attack that problem is where their different business methodology is going to come in and hopefully allow one offeror to have a better approach than the others. So we might give them, labor categories, but we wouldn't give them number of hours associated with that. Does that make sense? And if not, Joseph, I hope you will ask more. But basically, you don't give them everything, because if we give them everything, we have taken out all of their innovations, because they're only going to respond, and basically you just made it a go, no-go in LPTA and ISB, however you want to word that, when you give them that level of specificity.
Thank you. I think that's a common problem.
Yes.
So. Okay, are there any other questions out there? Now's your chance. Of course, Carol has made herself available if you wanted to send her an email and ask your question privately. You're welcome to do that, but everyone learns from your question when you do it in a public venue like this, so it's great for the rest of us.
And the way I look at it, there is no such thing as a stupid question. The only stupid one is one that's not asked, because if it's not clear to you, it's probably not clear to at least 10 or 15 other people as well. So, I will never look down on any question.
Okay. All righty. I would like to remind all of the attendees to have put their email address in the bottom box on the right, so that they will get a CLP credit. And I'd like to say that I'm super grateful for Carol to be our presenter. She's one of the few actually professional presenters that you will get because she's a full-time instructor. So she's highly qualified at this, and we're grateful for that kind of expertise. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that. Now, Maureen, I do have this one conclusion chart I'd like to go over.
Good.
If we have a few minutes. Yes. Okay. So in conclusion, a requirements definition, the way you approach it for a sole source action versus a competitive action is totally different. Those of you who have a very strong sole source background, you know that your contractor basically helps you refine your requirements as you go through the process. When we are talking competitive, it is on the government to do our due diligence through market research, which can include industry one-on-ones. Talk to those contractors and find out what is the latest, greatest methods of doing things that's in the industry, and then let's take that and make our requirements better. The thing to remember is, do not make the requirements so overly restrictive that it's going to eliminate or hamper competition. So don't take information here from one industry perspective and say, yes, that's what we've got to have, when only one offerer can provide that because it's their proprietary information. Be careful with that. Ambiguous language hurts the government because we're the drafter of the performance work statement or the SAO or the SU. So ambiguous language hurts. Be as specific as we can. You want to ensure that you limit the evaluation criteria, factors and subfactors, to the absolute minimum that will be able to allow you to differentiate among the offers. Because the more factors and subfactors you have, the less important each one becomes in the overall source selection decision. So stick to only those that are the true discriminators that are going to allow the best offeror to rise to the top. Make sure that your section L and your section M completely track to each other, and then you also have to make sure that they're exactly what is in your source selection plan, which is the internal document that our source selection boards will use to conduct the evaluation. So you want to make sure you don't have any ambiguities or any inconsistencies between section M and L of the RFP and the source selection plan. And then with that, I think I have one more chart. This is only the tip of the iceberg as we're talking in the acquisition planning process. For the little bit we talked about for the past 45 or 50 minutes, there's a whole world beyond that to explore. Have fun exploring it. I don't know if you could tell in my talking or not, but I'm very passionate about contracting and very passionate about source selection. And it really thrills me to be able to come to work every day. It did as a contract specialist. It did as a contracting officer. And now I have my dream job at DAU. So enjoy your work. Okay, life is too short for you to be in a job that you do not enjoy. And there are different aspects even of government contracting and government acquisition. You may not like talking to a contractor and going through discussions. Then you may want to be in on the requirements development side. There's nothing wrong with that. Find your niche, find what makes you happy, and succeed at it, okay? So that's all I can offer you today is thank you very much. You have my contact information on that chart. I am traveling this week, but I will be back in the office on Monday. And thank you again for your participation.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.